A new game had been released, sending gamers into a frenzy. But what no one expected was that this game was, in truth, a gateway to hell. Zhang Xiao started playing on a friend's recommendation, and everything was going well until he fell into a trap and had his HP reduced to 0. That's when the bug occurred. His consciousness was transported into the body of Yama, the king of hell and creator of the game. Trapped between the digital world and the spiritual underworld, Zhang Xiao must uncover the secrets behind that twisted reality. Little by little, he discovers that the game hides many mysteries, and that saving humanity might depend solely on him. Now finishing the game isn't enough, he must survive hell. Gamers enjoy playing on PC or mobile games, but none of them expected their dream was about to come true. No one knew when that new game had even been released. It didn't feel like just another immersive game. It was more like a key to another world, one called Kings of Hell. An explosion erupts near the village. As the smoke clears, the player's screen appears showing the character stats for Zhang Xiao. It seemed the starting weapons were really weak. One of the game's NPCs appears. His name was Beggar Ghost. Right then, the player sees an opportunity to level up. Using a power amplification enchantment on his weapon, he attacks without a second thought. Zhang Xiao strikes the little ghost, and the NPC laments. Because of the attack, the player's XP increases. It looked like that ghost, when defeated, dropped a good amount of money and a rare crystal. The system congratulates him, but Zhang Xiao isn't happy at all to hear the ridiculously lame title he was given. Still, the reward was good, so it had been worth it. But suddenly he hears a loud noise from behind, and a fire tornado hits him. The player wonders who could have launched such an attack at him. Due to the attack, his HP drops, and from behind the bushes, a group of players appears. That group with weird names was definitely after the crystal Zhang Xiao had just earned. They seemed to be a group of player killers who preferred hunting solo players rather than fighting monsters. But before the group could attack, Zhang Xiao throws a smoke bomb to make his escape. It looked like his plan had worked. However, even at a distance, he was struck by an arrow and lost even more HP. One of the players in that group had an exclusive skill that let him hit enemy players right in the heart. That was definitely a serious problem. The brute hits Zhang Xiao's quiver, and after robbing him, they all leave. While thinking that all his effort over the past few days had gone to waste, he slowly starts losing consciousness. Taking advantage of the fact he was about to log off, he begins thinking about chores he needs to do at home. But his thoughts are quickly interrupted by female voices, and as soon as he opens his eyes, he finds himself staring at 4 party balloons belonging to 2 stunning women. Besides the 2 who woke him up, 2 others were massaging his feet. In that instant, Zhang Xiao was completely confused. He thought he had logged out, but when he sees his reflection in the mirror, he's shocked. He asks where he is and how he became that. His servants kneel, startled by his reaction, and explain that this was his castle. Worried, one of them starts apologizing, calling him King Yama. Upon hearing the title of king, Zhang Xiao couldn't be happier. He was now the big boss. He lifts his servant's chin and gives her an order. He had waited years for that moment. When he died, it had felt so real. Maybe other activities would feel real too. But before anything could happen, another voice calls him. A woman with kitsune-like features informs him that the emperors had arrived. Upon seeing her, Zhang Xiao almost has a heart attack from excitement. But how was he supposed to give information to the emperors if he had no idea what to say? Besides, these girls didn't seem to be acting like NPCs. What the hell was going on? A little blue ghost gives the order for everyone to rise. King Yama enters the room and sits on his throne. The 4 emperors of the south, north, east, and west were seated at the table alongside him. However, his servant complains those weren't the emperors, but the generals. The general of the east says his emperor was busy and couldn't attend. Zhang Xiao interrupts them both and says he has important matters to discuss. At that moment, everyone goes on high alert. King Yama had never acted with such seriousness before. They wonder if the little king had finally matured. A screen appears and an explanation about the game begins. Since its launch, more than 3 million players had logged in without even realizing they had been taken to hell. And according to the developers, every time a battle happens, the player actually loses life energy. Furthermore, whenever one of the ghosts dies, they reincarnate and return to the game. 54% of players were at level 1, 43 at level 2, and only 3% at level 3. In short, those were the current stats of the game, says Kitsune. The general of the east praises the summary and says there's nothing to add. A moment of silence reigns in the meeting room, leaving the demon visibly nervous. After all, his perspective of the king was quite grim. However, inside Yama's mind, Zhang Xiao was in despair. He had just discovered that the game wasn't a game, that the monsters and ghosts were real all at once. So the body he was now inhabiting was that of the actual king of hell. Well, since the king apparently had nothing to say, the general of the east was going to take his leave. But then Yama asks whether that energy harvesting really didn't put the players' lives at risk, and follows up by asking why so many players had fallen into comas. In desperation, the general of the east starts saying he didn't know what Yama was talking about. He was just following orders. But Kitsune interrupts, saying that the players were under her jurisdiction and that they couldn't let this continue. In response, he charges at Kitsune, not accepting that a servant like her dared raise her voice at him. But the moment Zhang Xiao senses danger, information about the general starts appearing. His level, weaknesses, everything. At that moment, his servant also lunges forward and the two clash. In just a few seconds, the general is subdued without much effort on her part. He panics, not knowing she was that strong. But before she could kill him, Zhang Xiao interrupts the meeting and says it's over. The situation was very serious. He needed to think carefully about what to do next. He wanted to take the opportunity to walk around and find out more things, but she says it's time for his bath. He is then taken to a hot spring where all his servants are waiting for him. Even in hell, all he could think about was how blessed he was. As soon as Kitsune arrives, she asks the girls to undress him. She says he had worked hard and it was time to relax a bit. At that moment, he is knocked out by her beauty and begins to lose consciousness. Zhang Xiao hoped it wasn't a dream. He wonders if, in this afterlife, he would finally say goodbye to his purity. But then a system notification pops up, welcoming him back to the standard game mode. Lu Zifeng speaks super excitedly about the new game King of Hell, but Zhang Xiao didn't really trust those free-to-play games and was worried about his friend. A few days later, Lu Zifeng was taken to the hospital in a coma. Even after running tests, the specialists couldn't understand the cause, so all they could do was wait. Zhang Xiao is shocked to hear this, so he decides to play the game to understand what happened to his friend and solve the mystery. Now he understood everything. That game was a trap set by the generals of hell to steal energy from humans. While he was freaking out, another player jumps over him. It seemed that girl had really invested in gear. She complains that he was in her way but quickly goes back to running. Two players debate the value of those fire boots and how the girl must be rich. But the only thing Zhang Xiao could think about now was the view he got when the girl jumped over him. But right after, he also starts running. He couldn't stay still. The first wild level 1 monster appears and he defeats it in just a few seconds. He needed to reach the Peach Blossom Valley as fast as possible. What had been said in that meeting was still echoing in his mind. If the souls were collected, they could no longer return to their original bodies. He opens the system to log out, but an error message appears on the screen. It seemed he was no longer able to leave that game, but he had one trick up his sleeve. If he could return to the king's body, he might gather more information to turn the game in humanity's favor. A voice is heard coming from the forest. It sounded like a girl was struggling, fighting against mud monsters. He watches her from a distance, trying to understand her playstyle. She tries to slash the monsters, but since they're made of mud, they regenerate quickly. It looked like she was having a hard time dealing with them. Even so, she was clearly wealthy, so if he could make her his companion, that would be great. While he's thinking about it, she ends up getting attacked. Zhang Xiao then summons the ice crystal and heads toward the mud monsters that were holding the player captive. Now in the bedroom, King Yama awakens with his maids around him, clearly worried. Upon hearing that the emperors had already left, he is outraged. But they remind him that he himself had dismissed the meeting a few hours ago. Confused, he tries to understand what's going on and asks them to stay where they are. Something felt off. His body felt strange. What the hell was happening? He strikes a mud monster, freeing the girl. The best way to deal with that type of enemy was to freeze them and then shatter them. She's surprised to see someone protecting her, but it seemed the ice buff didn't last long, and soon the monsters began to reform. Without a second thought, she tells him to move aside and launches a giant ice crystal into the mud field, freezing all of them at once. If she had known about the weakness earlier, she wouldn't have taken so long to wipe them out. Zhang Xiao also ends up trapped in the middle of it. She asks how he knew ice attacks worked against mud monsters. Freeing himself, he says he had a guide that mentioned it. The girl then remembers the book she bought and forgot to read. Still, with so many wild monsters out there, how had he found the time to memorize the details? Zhang Xiao answers her question by saying that his greatest power is his memory. He has the ability to remember everything he reads after seeing it just once. Right then and there, she's impressed by his intelligence. He then says goodbye, telling her to do her homework before going out fighting like that. But in truth, Zhang Xiao had a plan. And when she asks to be his partner, he plays hard to get, asking how she could possibly be useful to him. So she flaunts her wealth and says she can buy anything in the game for him. Using her charm, she asks him again to take her along. But deep down, she's fuming, having to beg some nobody. Since everything seemed too good to be true, he asks if she's actually an old man playing the game. But suddenly the ground beneath their feet begins to crack. A red lightning bolt shoots into the sky, sending the forest birds flying. It seemed he had arrived just in time. Zhang Xiao grabs the girl's hand and tells her to follow him. A dungeon had just appeared. With the arsenal she had, it was worth trying to clear it. At the dungeon's portal, other higher-level players were already waiting to enter. But before they could do anything, they were hit by a banana peel attack, making them dizzy for a moment, which was just enough time for the two of them to slip past and enter the dungeon, temporarily sealing it behind them. The players were furious. A portal like that was hard to open. Still, there was no need to panic. They just had to wait for the two to come out. But if they managed to grab all the treasures, that would be a problem. There were 5 types of dungeons near the starter village: courage, power, speed, skill, and luck. The first 4 were fairly easy to clear, but the luck dungeon depended entirely on the player's luck. On top of that, the monsters in each dungeon had different attributes, and to defeat them you had to attack using the opposite attribute. Even if by some chance you had the right attribute against a monster, to clear the tower you had to deal with 3 different types of opponents. Most beginner weapons don't have any attributes, so all the other players could do was wait for whoever entered to fail. As soon as they passed through the portal, they came face to face with a metal-type monster. It was her first time seeing one of that level. She was impressed. Zhang Xiao begins explaining how to clear the dungeon. With that said, she prepares her arsenal and he charges in to attack. Using a fire sword, he melts the monster in a single blow, amazed by the power of that artifact. The second one to appear is an earth-type monster. He turns to his partner and asks for an artifact called Thunder Vines. She throws it, hitting the monster directly. That attack had a wood attribute, which was poisonous to earth-type monsters. After defeating the second one, they waited for the third enemy. But before they could notice, Zhang Xiao suddenly found himself frozen in place. A water demoness had appeared. His partner is shocked to see him frozen. She hadn't expected the monster to attack first. But slowly the ice begins to crack, and to everyone's surprise, Zhang Xiao manages to break free. His armor had the earth attribute, so it seemed that luck was really on his side. He lands a solid punch right on the demoness's vital crystal. A ghost appears, announcing that they had successfully completed the Tree of Fortune and had been rewarded with 1,500 experience points. In addition, they also obtained a new sword with greater attack power than the previous one, a ring capable of making them invisible for 5 minutes, and a rare item called the Phoenix Crown. Zhang Xiao says he only wanted the sword and that she could keep the other 2 artifacts. It seemed that the Phoenix Crown was part of a set, and she wanted to collect the other pieces. The girl then opens her arsenal to increase her status points. He questioned her about putting all her points into courage, and she says that's what she's always done. It looked like he'd have to explain how the level up mechanics work to her. All players start with 100 experience points, and to level up you always need 0.5 times your current points. For example, to reach level 2 you need 50 points, and to reach level 3 75. The 6 types of stats are: first, courage. 1 point of courage equals +5 to attack, HP, and defense. Second is vitality. 1 point equals 50 HP. Third is aura or mana, which initially gives you 10 points of magic resistance. Fourth is agility. 1 point equals 3 attack. Fifth is defense. 1 point gives 20 HP, plus 20 defense, and 5 tank points. And lastly, there's Yama, which is a type of charm. It increases your chances of obtaining a boss item and can only be activated every 10 levels. All players gain 3 power points per level up, and with those points they can upgrade their attributes. But those points are non-refundable, so it's important to think carefully about how to use them. For example, even if you max out your strength, if you don't increase your speed, you'll have problems. The girl gets really confused with all that information, so Zhang Xiao just gives up on explaining further. Meanwhile, he plans out his own point distribution strategy, focusing on courage, vitality, and agility. The updates then appear on the game screen, and now everything was definitely ready. His partner finishes as well and brags that her attack and defense were better. With that, they exit the dungeon, but are unexpectedly caught in an ambush. They leave the dungeon, and some players begin their assault to rob them, but they were much stronger now. Zhang Xiao quickly disarms the 2 and puts away his sword. The 2 are shocked to see they had managed to clear the dungeon and level up. In desperation, one of them turns and calls for help, but the third was already running away. Zhang Xiao hadn't intended to attack other players, but now he wouldn't hold back. Without thinking twice, the enemy players run away, trembling for their lives. But he wasn't going to let them escape that easily. He takes the moment to show his partner how important it is to level up speed for a swordsman. In just a few seconds, he takes down both of them. Zhang Xiao then gives the 2 a lecture about not attacking other players. They apologize, and our generous hero lets the boys go. Meanwhile, Xiao Lu was amazed. Zhang Xiao asks if she wants to keep being his partner or go solo. She then says that, if it wasn't a problem, she'd like to stay by his side. With her answer, he immediately starts warming up to head to the Peach Valley. She gets frustrated when she realizes he didn't pay her any attention and activates one of her equipment items. Now she was wearing something tighter to help with running, a piece of gear called Phantom Dragon, capable of increasing a player's speed. Being a man, he couldn't help but stare. He was genuinely moved by the young woman's beauty, and she hadn't chosen that outfit by accident. She knew that any man who saw her would be affected for sure. But instead of showing it, he asks why she chose an assassin's outfit if she was a swordswoman, leaving the girl stunned. Before she could get even more embarrassed, she walks ahead of him so they could get moving. Zhang Xiao notices that she's upset. If it were the old him, he definitely would have fallen for that. But ever since ending up in the king's body, he had seen so many beauties that he had gotten used to it. As they ran, they chatted. It seemed everyone was heading to Peach Valley because of a new game event. They reached the destination before sunset and admired the scenery a bit. Xiao Lu wanted to jump straight into battle, but Zhang Xiao had another strategy. Because of the event, High-level players were likely hiding throughout the valley. She argues that they had enough items and didn't need to worry. If they needed more, she'd just check if there was a shop nearby. She gets excited upon seeing that there was one close. The plan Zhang Xiao had in mind had worked. When they arrive, they say they want to buy a few things and ask to see the shop stock. The vendor quickly opens 2 cabinets, showing all the items he had. They were great items, but the prices were ridiculously high. The vendor is not happy at all to hear them talking about the prices. Zhang Xiao starts an aggressive kind of bargaining with him, but when they see how much Xiao Lu had in her game account, both are completely shocked. A notification about the event appears on the game screen, and the players are super excited to see there would be rare items and double points. The sky darkens and an earthquake begins. Coming from underground, the Eastern General emerges. They prepare to attack, thinking about the rewards. But with just one strike from the general, a whole group is wiped out. Their HPs drop to 0. Everyone is stunned to see their teammates defeated in a single hit. And before they can recover, they get struck too. The long and mid-range players jump into the fight. If they could stay far enough away, maybe they could bring him down. But the general hurls his axe and hits them anyway. He was way too strong. They were definitely going to lose, the girl cries. Seeing the enemy's power, everyone starts to retreat. The general punches the ground, releasing a shockwave that hits several of the fleeing players. He couldn't be more excited, but then a sphere rolls between his feet and he gets frozen. Xiao Lu had bought time for the other players to escape. They take the opportunity and start running again. Within seconds, the demon breaks through the ice barrier, but right after, multiple fire attacks come his way, and from above him, a player appears, landing a direct hit. The others start to feel a glimmer of hope after seeing the strike. The player's armor was extremely powerful, worth more than 100,000 gold coins in the game. Seeing something like that up close really was a dream. Annoyed at having fallen into a trap, the general starts to complain. But Zhang Xiao was ready and knew he had to end this as quickly as possible. He then lands a series of blows on the monster. The combo he was using was a kind of critical combination within the game. Everyone is left speechless. It was a high-level technique. It was already the 10th combo he had landed on the general. Even though he was using high-quality equipment, its durability was down to 24 out of 30. The monster grins and activates a skill that freezes his HP loss. He strikes the player, saying that now it was his turn to have some fun. Zhang Xiao is thrown back and loses 20% of his life. The crowd cheers when they see that 70% of the attack's power had been blocked. But even so, the fight was getting dangerous. Suddenly, he remembers some information. When he was in the king's body, he had seen the general's weakness. So it was time to find out whether that information was true. The general attacks again without mercy, and when Zhang Xiao takes the hit, his HP drops to less than half. The cooldown time for the next attack was 5 seconds, which he planned to use to his advantage. Soon the demon celebrates victory, as his opponent was far enough away for him to recharge. The players around start to get nervous. If he lost, they'd all be in trouble. Zhang Xiao keeps moving forward, switching weapons at the 3-second mark. The general goes on alert, not expecting the switch. Now there were 2 seconds left, and he was getting ready for the next attack. But at the last second, Zhang Xiao activates his weapon's power and hits the general's weak spot, causing the demon to fall to his knees, rage and confusion clear in his eyes. That sword could increase the player's speed by 100%. A system message appears, congratulating him on the new achievement, and everyone starts celebrating the boss's defeat. But he suspects something. It wasn't normal for them to know his weakness, so he would come after Zhang Xiao again. At that very moment, he regrets it. If that reached the king's ears, he was screwed. He then grabs his partner by the hand and pulls her away. The girl was a bit confused, but he had to try something. Zhang Xiao needed to find a quiet place so she could restore her HP. He removes his armor while listening to Xiao Luo's complaints, but he didn't have time to explain. He needed her to do what he was saying. As soon as he was eliminated, she was to call his house. He needed to know how things were. With that said, the young man grabs her sword and finishes off his own HP. The sword falls to the ground, and Xiao Luo is clearly shaken. Now he understood that the pain he was feeling was his spiritual energy being drained. In a few seconds, he ends up back in King Yama's body. His idea had worked. A female voice calls out to him, and when he looks up, he sees Kitsune nearly in tears. Zhang Xiao jumps in embarrassment and quickly gets off her lap. He apologizes and helps her up, but Kitsune says there was nothing to apologize for. She was just worried. He then says he was just dizzy, it was nothing serious. Seeing that this didn't calm her, he completely changes the subject and runs off the moment she tells him the location of the Reincarnation well. Watching the king's actions, his servant is left confused. She was starting to like this gentle side of him. As soon as they reach the well's location, they find out the general had already reincarnated 3 minutes ago, and he seemed to be full of hatred, thinking someone had leaked his information. Zhang Xiao then goes after him. He needed to intercept him before he reached the emperor. But already in the sea between worlds, the general had requested the fastest ocean monster to take him. As soon as he departs, the king and Kitsune arrive. He'd be screwed if that demon reported what had happened. Without thinking twice, he summons a weapon. The general senses a strange presence, and in just a few seconds, his transport beast is sliced in half. Shaken by the surprise attack, the general returns to the starting point and comes face to face with the king. He asks what the meaning of all this was. Zhang Xiao then asks where the demon was going in such a hurry. The general says something strange had happened to him and he needed to report it to the emperor. But the emperor wasn't anyone. If something happened, he should report directly to the king. The demon tries to twist his words to his advantage, but it was very clear that to him, the emperor was far more important. At that moment, Kitsune calls out to him, but he didn't want to waste more time. He just wanted to leave. Zhang Xiao sees the chance to deal with his problems once and for all and summons Yama's weapon. He actually wanted something small. He wasn't expecting something that massive. The general is surprised by the king's sudden change in posture, but Zhang Xiao brushes it off by saying he just wanted to test the scythe. Yama strikes in the general's direction, landing a direct hit. With a single blow, he defeats the general. The power was overwhelming. The demon is visibly shaken, and Zhang Xiao says he didn't strike him to test the weapon, but because his presence was irritating. But before he could deliver the final blow, his opponent throws himself into the water trying to escape. A pink rope appears in the sky and wraps around the general. It starts tightening more and more, and before he could defend himself, he ends up being defeated by Kitsune. Zhang Xiao is surprised by her power. As soon as she finishes her strike, she apologizes for having acted without the king's permission, but instead of punishing her, he praises her. That was the first time the king had ever complimented her. Now he could breathe a sigh of relief. His identity was safe for a little while longer. With that, he asks the fox to wait outside the king's office. He wanted to make use of any information he could find. If he managed to get details about the game, he would surely become unbeatable. And upon opening the desk drawer, he comes across the game development book and a list of armaments, exactly what he wanted. Outside, the little fox girl was clearly worried. It made no sense for the king to kill the general out of nowhere. Maybe he did it because the man had attacked earlier, she wonders. Given what happened at the bathhouse, she didn't realize she was that important to the king. Meanwhile, inside the study, Zhang Xiao reads everything he can about the game. Yama was truly a brilliant strategist. He had thought of every detail of the weapon mechanics and upgrades. Suddenly, he comes to a section labeled Ghost Horde. It seemed they wanted to drain an immense amount of human energy all at once, so the king had to come up with strategies to deal with it. In a game event, humans would have to face a horde of demons that would resurrect instantly. That ghost wave was scheduled for September 9th and would last about 6 hours, with no warning given to players. When the time comes, the starting village's barrier will break and the login crystal will stop functioning. Panicking over the date, he starts to feel the same pressure he had felt before. It seemed like it was time for him to go. Kitsune hears a loud noise coming from the room and enters without knocking. For some reason, the king was lying on the floor. She approaches to see if he's okay, but is pushed away with a slap. Yama hadn't given her permission to touch him. Feng Yang is visibly shaken by the reaction and apologizes. The king looks toward the notebook in his study. It seems something really was happening, and he had to figure it out. Back in his own body, Zhang Xiao discovers a bug is preventing him from logging off. In desperation, he messages as many players as he can, warning them not to go online before September 10th. Since he couldn't log out, he needed to make that attack work in his favor. Zhang Xiao climbs to the top of the mountain. The sky was starting to change colors. Roars and gunfire could be heard throughout the forest. An explosion occurs and several ghosts fall to the ground, while others run in panic. A player named Manhua was going all out. Zhang Xiao definitely hadn't expected something like that. The explosions didn't stop, but it seemed the more Manhua shot, the more monsters appeared. Zhang Xiao watches the scene from above. If she moved while shooting, she could escape, but since she stayed in one spot, she was running out of options. He gets ready to help, opening up his arsenal. Because of the last battle, he had jumped from level 8 to level 15. Excited by this, he also wanted to check if he had gained any new magical artifacts. But it looked like the system hadn't expected anyone to defeat the general, so there was nothing but coins. Although frustrating, it was better than getting nothing. That said, it was time to recruit another rich player for his team. Manhua was already in despair when Zhang Xiao made a grand entrance. He says he had heard her cries for help, and the girl couldn't be more grateful. But just like the notebook said, the monsters that had fallen to the ground came back to life in the exact same spot. He tells her to hold on tight and activates a rope artifact. Just as the monsters attack, the two of them fly out of there. Manhua gasps from the adrenaline and asks what kind of equipment that guy had bought. He shows her it was just a rope from the starter level. The girl is super impressed by it, thinking he was a real hero. He keeps up his cool guy act while she keeps asking more about his game tactics. Playing humble to impress, Zhang Xiao says it was nothing special. Manhua then turns on the charm, saying she wanted to be his in-game partner. But in her excitement, the girl doesn't stop talking and asking questions. Meanwhile, he distributes the points he had earned. When he had 10 points left, he put them all into Yama and waited for his new power to unlock, and his new skill was called Bloodlust. It seemed that this exclusive power allowed him to drain 3% of the enemy's HP per second, but only during a duel. Zhang Xiao couldn't be happier. However, while they were distracted, the two were surrounded by a battalion. Those were zombie soldiers. Alone they weren't very strong, but in groups, they were nearly unbeatable. Despite being cornered, the players were pretty optimistic about defeating them. Manhwa activates her weapon, taking out several at once. Being on top of the mountain really was a great strategy. But soon after, a barrage of arrows is launched in their direction. Caught off guard, they both end up losing a lot of HP. Thinking quickly, they managed to locate where the archers were, but looking to the side they discovered the soldiers even had catapults. The ghosts could have held back a little. They were being way too strategic. Zhang Xiao complains. Manhwa then asks what they should do. If they stayed where they were, more and more enemies would keep showing up. And as soon as the catapults are launched, Zhang Xiao picks the girl up in his arms and decides the two of them had to get out of there immediately. Using the rope again, they managed to fly across the enemy field. And now that they were behind the lines, they could attack from the rear. So he summons his sword, still holding Manhwa in his arms, heading straight toward the main knight. With a single blow, he strikes the ghost and lands. The others look at him in fear, and a new title notification pops up. Once again, he was playing the badass. But in the blink of an eye, the general of the troops revives and starts chasing them. Manhwa asks where they were going, since they had entered the forest. Zhang Xiao then turns to her and says they were going into a dungeon, so they head toward the Earth Dragon's lair. Since the monsters were going to keep reviving during that period, there was nothing better than farming a boss. Manhwa is completely shaken by that. She thought that kind of mindset was legendary. But suddenly his body starts glowing. It looked like a teleport had been activated. Out of nowhere, Xiao Lu appears flying and lands right on top of the protagonist. Super cliche. He's surprised to see her logged in. Theoretically, the initial crystal was supposed to have been deactivated. Unfortunately, from the middle of the smoke, an opponent appears, not even kidding. The woman attacks without a second thought. Zhang Xiao shouts, saying that this wasn't the time to be attacking other players. They needed to team up. But she clearly wasn't in the mood to talk and throws an artifact at them, causing an explosion. Lang Yuning was a level 8 assassin with some interesting specialties. Because of the explosion, Xiao Lu and Manhwa lost sight of him. Stealthily, he had managed to get behind Lang Yuning. At some point, he had used the Flickered Charm, an artifact that allowed the player to teleport. She feels something touch her back and gets flustered, realizing that maybe it wasn't a sword. He gets confused, and when he realizes what she was thinking, he explains that he was using the handle of the weapon, not the blade. Lang Yuning takes advantage of the opening to strike, and in desperation Zhang Xiao asks the other two girls to help instead of just standing there. Xiao Lu opens her arsenal. They needed to find something that would calm her down without hurting her. Manhwa then activates her weapon's capture form and throws a net. She ends up trapping both of them by accident, but Zhang Xiao wasn't upset at all about it. The kitty warns that the more they move, the tighter the net will get, so it's better if they stay still. But he wasn't expecting that and ends up in an embarrassing situation. The net keeps getting tighter to the despair of Xiao Lu and Lang Yuning. Zhang Xiao tries to explain himself, but the more he talks, the worse it gets. The two end up being released, and the assassin explains that the dungeon belonged to her team. They could go somewhere else. They argue about it, and it seems her group had died to the final boss of the dungeon. They should have returned already, but so far, they hadn't shown up. Zhang Xiao then says she didn't need to keep waiting. According to the rules of the event going on, her friends wouldn't be able to log back in tonight. Everything had been changed, even though players could still enter. Those who died received a temporary ban. Well, in that case, she would give up the dungeon to them. But then he has an idea. Since Lang Yuning already knew the dungeon well, they could team up to clear it together. The assassin thinks for a moment. They really were a high-level group with good gear. Even if she didn't like him, teaming up temporarily was worth it. Having said that, she agrees to join the team, but she wouldn't give them her contact. After that night, she never wanted to see them again. But Xiao Lu makes her entrance and says she didn't have to worry because Zhang Xiao had her by his side, so he didn't need anyone else. Lang Yuning ignores the little show and says it was time for them to enter the dungeon. She walks ahead, and the two stay behind gossiping. It seemed like Xiao Lu didn't really like her attitude. She walks after the assassin, and Manhwa starts mocking the protagonist. Already inside the dungeon, Zhang Xiao asks the black-haired girl if she had called the number he gave her. She replies saying his sister answered. It seems he had been online for a few days already. If he kept that up, she was going to call an ambulance. He really wished he could go offline, but unfortunately, due to the bug, he wasn't able to, and there was no way he could explain that to her. Only then does Zhang Xiao think about food and basic bodily needs, but she says his sister was taking care of him as best as she could, and it looked like he had gained around 30 kilos in the days he'd been in the game. But before he could even freak out about that information, they had arrived at the dungeon entrance. Rishi of Sina says that once they entered, they had to follow her lead since she already knew the dungeon. The reactions to what she said were comically controversial. The dragon's lair really was quite large, and the smell was far from pleasant. After all, since it was reviving every few seconds, there wasn't time for the blood to dry. The beast awakens right in front of them, and everyone begins preparing for battle. It seemed it had the power to breathe fire and also paralyze enemies with its poison. The monster then prepares for its first attack and everyone dodges. Mangmu complains about the dragon's scales being too thick, so she couldn't land a hit. Lang Yuning then asks them to distract the beast and lead it to her so she could hit its stomach. That was how her team had managed to defeat the enemy the last 2 times. Xiao Luo tells the girl with pigtails that she'd apply pressure from behind, so she had to keep shooting. Meanwhile, he was trying to reason out why the previous team had lost the 3rd time, since they had won the first 2 and already knew the monster's weak point. That's when a thought crossed Zhang Xiao's mind. Since they were real monsters, they had the ability to remember how they had died, so if they kept using the same tactics, the dragon would already know it was actually an ambush. He then shouts for the girls to stop what they were doing and get out of there. Even after hearing it was a trap, the monster was much faster. Mangmu wouldn't be able to dodge in time. It seemed like the dragon had been acting the whole time, because despite the speed spell, its attacks seemed faster. So Zhang Xiao activates his speed power and grabs both of them, saving the girls from the attack. But they end up falling beneath him, and due to the embarrassment of the position, they hit him instead of thanking him for saving them. The assassin watches the mess, and due to her lack of attention, she ends up being noticed by the dragon. It launches a thorn attack in her direction, and upon hearing the noise, the attention of the 3 brats shifts. Right when Lang Yuning is struck by the thorns, losing HP. She was clearly confused. The monster had never used that attack before. The situation was not in their favor. Zhang Xiao had to act fast. The dragon launches another attack at the woman, but this time she isn't hit. And using the golden armor, he not only protects her, but also asks Xiao Luo to launch the vine weapon. At that moment, they managed to restrain the monster, but it seemed immune to that plant, as it was breaking free. It looked like against high-level monsters, using opposing elements wasn't enough, but the 3 seconds the vines could hold it would be enough. Zhang Xiao then calls Xiao Luo and tells her that as soon as he gives the signal, she should throw the vines. Lang Yuning tries to stop him. If the 4 of them weren't managing together, he wouldn't be able to do it alone. But he had chosen that dungeon exactly because he knew the dragon's weakness. While he was in King Myoma's body, he had managed to obtain more information. It would be difficult for beginners to kill that dragon on the first try, but if they knew its weakness, it would be a turning point for the game. That way, it would bring more popularity to the game and more people would join. She warns that the dragon was about to use the spike attack again. But before the monster stomps the ground, Zhang Xiao signals for them to release the vine. He then throws a weapon, generating a shockwave beneath the monster. A small red dot can be seen on the monster's belly. Throwing himself underneath it, he drags the sword until it hits that spot. The dragon lets out a roar as it is defeated. The girls watch him, unaware of that detail. He then explains the dragon's weak spot and why the assassin's team failed in the 3rd battle. It seems that Spot changed location. The reward screen appears, and they did well. The rewards were great and triple made them even better. The girls' levels also increased, even though they didn't feel like they had done much. But they didn't have time to think about stats now. The monster was already respawning, and they needed to change strategies because it wouldn't fall for the same trick again. So this time they used the vines to avoid the spike attack, then the bomb to expose the belly, finishing with the sword on the weak spot. And so they continued for the next rounds, always slightly changing the strategy and rotating who would land the final blow. Exactly so everyone could get points in dungeon rewards, but eventually they had only 1 vine weapon left, since they didn't know they would need to keep fighting repeatedly like that. But they didn't count on Zhang Xiao's cunning. Before the game started, he had bought all the vine weapons and bombs from the stock. That way, they were able to keep fighting for a while longer. I admit I'm starting to feel sorry for that earth dragon, poor thing. Meanwhile, outside the dungeon, high-class demons observed the players. The king had ordered them to find the best player, and using the ID they had received, they were after Zhang Xiao. The Ghost Wave event had ended, and the game had returned to normal. Their levels had increased significantly after just 1 night of battle. Everyone was about to log out of the game, even the dragon was relieved to hear that. Zhang Xiao comments that he'll take one last walk, and Mangmu admires him. The two say goodbye and log out temporarily. In contrast, Xiao Luo wasn't going to let him escape so easily. She knew he had been logged in for days and needed to get out soon. After hearing he would log out, she also logs out of the game. Since he still had the bug, he used the time to meditate and recover his energy inside the game itself. But suddenly he senses two presences around him. The king's demons had found him. He asks what they wanted with him, but then one of the girls attacks. Zhang Xiao backs off and realizes they were probably impresses, not players. The one in white says his reflexes were really good, and it was time for them to see how far he could go. At that moment, he realizes he's in trouble and ends up caught by one of their chains. Those chains were draining his life force, so to break free, he tries to activate the lightning talisman, but not to hit the enemy. He hits himself to break the chains. If he got caught by a blow like that again, he'd be screwed. so Zhang Xiao activates the golden armor. One of them opens a portal and the other's chains shoot through it toward him. He dodges at the last second, but is shocked by the range of that weapon. It seemed unlimited. The one in black laughs at his desperation. They would show no mercy. Several portals open, and little by little he begins to be defeated, unable to land a single proper blow. His armor dissipates, and he returns to his previous outfit. They were curious to see how he would react upon realizing he was facing possible imminent death. He had only one option left, so he activates his exclusive power, Bloodlust. A giant warrior forms around him, startling his opponents. They hadn't expected something like that, and their chains could no longer break through the barrier. Zhang Xiao was ready to fight seriously now. The explanation for Bloodlust appears to the ghost in white. It really was a dangerous power. He attacks her with his sword, but it has no effect, and the ghost is able to pass through the barrier as if it were nothing. It was time for them to retreat. They had already seen what he was capable of. Zhang Xiao was confused. The power was supposed to have worked, but it didn't. Besides, they had shown up and left without giving any explanation. What could all of that mean, he wonders. Meanwhile, in the middle of the forest, the two of them talk about how the king had asked them to keep a close eye on him, though maybe not as close as one of them imagined. That said, there was a better way for them to follow Zhang Xiao, which was to become accessories and program the game so that he would find them. So they merge and transform into two bracelets, one black and one white. Beaten down from the thrashing he took, Zhang Xiao was thankful they had left. But out of nowhere, the system pings, announcing a new achievement and that he had been chosen to receive the yin-yang bracelet. Without understanding what was happening, both accessories appear on his arms, and a warning appears saying the player cannot remove the bracelets or will be severely penalized. He clearly knew it was the two who had just attacked him. He wasn't stupid, but he needed to pretend he hadn't noticed, so he thanks the system for its blessing. Back at the starting village, some players complain about the night before. Whoever didn't log in made no progress, and the players who were online jumped from rank 50 to the top 10. There were only 3 days left until the final monthly result. They couldn't be more jealous of those lucky players. The gossip continues among the players when Lang Yuning comes back online. Her old teammates call her and congratulate her on leveling up, but that scoundrel group from the beginning heads in her direction. Her friend approaches, wanting to know more about what happened that night, and one of the players complains because they had a lot of trouble defeating that dragon. Lang Yuning then comments that they had trouble because the dragon had figured out the strategy they were using. Jin Dashou then asks, if the dragon was so smart, how had they managed to defeat it so many times? The assassin then says that a player had discovered the monster's weak point, so even if it knew the strategy, somehow he still managed to beat it. They start laughing at her, because to those meatheads it didn't make much sense. After all, they thought they were better than everyone else. Her friend then defends her. Men really were jerks. Her friend's boyfriend tries to shift the tone, saying Lang Yuning leveling up was good for the team too. Also, the ranking calculation season was coming, so they had to hurry and level up as well. Hearing that, the boss clearly looks bothered. If they didn't level up soon, they wouldn't be able to move past that stage of the game. The brute regrets a little what he said after seeing the guy's reaction. Meanwhile, the other two gossip, trying to understand why they were so desperate to reach the next level. From the rumors they had heard, it seemed that when someone reached level 18, a huge prize would be waiting, and the first person to get there would become a trillionaire. The boss tells her not to spread that info to anyone, but it was her best friend, so she figured it was fine. But if something like that existed, how had they even found out about it? In the middle of the conversation, a game screen suddenly pops up. A new hunt had been released by the game, and the first person to defeat it would be greatly rewarded. They couldn't be more excited. It was just the kind of moment they needed. The two girls rush ahead, leaving the men behind. But no one expected that the guys were actually planning to betray the two players and keep the reward for themselves. At the same moment, everyone gets pumped. From afar, Zhang Xiao observes everything and wonders how that assassin ended up with that bunch of idiots. Well, either way, he had to be thankful, because that new information about the 18th floor of the game was very interesting. Excited about all of it, he figured it was the perfect chance to also deal with those bastards. Meanwhile, inside the bracelets, the deities complain about the player's choices. After all, if he wanted revenge, why was he heading in the opposite direction? Now at Master Smith's shop, he's welcomed by the shop attendant. He says he wants to buy new armor. The attendant then opens the store's stock and shows him the most purchased ones at the moment, but he complains that none of them had the quality he was looking for. The shop explains that you can buy primary armor and later improve it depending on the material. That said, he places several rare items on the table and asks if that would be enough to bring the armor to its maximum level. She couldn't be happier to see all of that. They were very rare items. Zhang Xiao then takes the opportunity to ask for an upgrade to his sword as well. Everything is placed inside the cauldron, and the equipment is completely ready. The water element armor now allowed him to be invincible for 10 seconds, and the sword, in addition to having the storm attacks option, also increased the player's speed by 130%. She praises him a bit more since it was rare to see those kinds of items in a beginner village. She asks him to wait a little longer and gives him a magical artifact that would allow him to upgrade his own equipment in the future. Zhang Xiao was in disbelief. Receiving an artifact like that for free was an incredible buff. He leaves the shop all happy, but in truth, he had fallen perfectly into King Yama's trap. The kitsune appears and thanks the shop owner for her work, but that item was something the king himself had created and wasn't even part of the game, so the demoness was a bit confused. Still, they shouldn't question his decisions since the king had his own plans. Still surprised by his new acquisition, he starts examining the bracelets. He didn't believe they were just luxury accessories. There had to be some kind of button to activate a power, but accidentally he presses one of the deities, and in response, it strikes a lightning bolt on his head. Zhang Xiao was even more confused. He had just lost 60% of his HP. The consequences were severe. A system message appeared saying that the bracelets had intelligence and would activate by themselves when necessary. In other words, the player didn't have to worry and could enjoy the battles, something he knew was clearly a lie. Xiao Lu spots him and walks over. It seemed like she had been looking for him for a while and only found him when she received his notification. Last time she nearly died right after logging in for not reading his message, so now she made sure to read them all. Meng Mu hadn't logged in yet, but they couldn't keep waiting. They had to go. She asks why the rush, and he says they needed to save someone. Several players were running toward the site of the new hunt. Some of them got tired along the way but couldn't stop, or they'd arrived too late. The mage of one group activates an earth spell, and they start moving while mounted on a giant mud beast. Meanwhile, others try to tame forest animals to use as mounts. That duo feels bad seeing how creative the others were, but they couldn't lose hope. A gust of wind blows past them, lifting the girl's dress and taking the guy's wig. Soon the sky starts to darken, and when everyone looks up, they see a huge flying creature. The money in that game was seriously broken, says the girl, announcing the creature's price and speed. This time, Xiao Lu had really invested in transportation, commenced Zhang Xiao. Watching the monster fly away, the players below realize how pathetic they are. Already in the Great Desert area, contrary to what they expected, the weather was very overcast and dark. The transport creature says goodbye, and Xiao Lu asks how they're going to find Lang Yuning. Admiring the scenery ahead, he says there's no need to rush, just sit and wait. She kicks him, seeing his true intentions, but he quickly changes the subject. He says that the band of scoundrels wanted to use the assassin to eliminate the target of the new hunt, so until the hunt boss showed up, they could take some time to relax and wait. Xiao Lu asks if he knew where the demon would appear, but since he was being watched by the deities on his wrist, he says he didn't know yet. The girl gets frustrated with that answer. She had been so excited before. But thinking about it, so far he had always been right about the monster's weak points and how to optimize strategies. Being by his side really gave a sense of safety. He notices her changing mood and how red her cheeks were at that moment. Even so, they decide to take a nap before the battle starts, but Zhang Xiao was soon awakened by a noise. As he gets up, he realizes he had been sleeping in a rather awkward position next to Xiao Lu. As expected, she kicks him hard the moment she wakes up. Meanwhile, in the middle of the desert, the boss was getting ready and crawling into position. According to what Zhang Xiao thought, that demon probably only came near the surface when it needed to feed. She comments that the monster was probably long and thick. Right away, Zhang Xiao's inner middle schooler kicks in, and he tries to play it off when he notices she saw the smirk on his face. It looked like other players had already begun fighting. He thinks they need to find a way to get the monster to stick its head out. He also notices that most mages were using the wood element, assuming the worm was of the earth element, but in truth, that worm was of the gold element, except no one else knew that, so he needed to find a way to attack it, without the deities noticing that he had read the manuscripts. But unexpectedly, Xiao Lu says exactly what he was thinking, about the worm's true element. He couldn't be happier about it, but unfortunately, the conclusion she reaches is that the monster is of the water element, not gold, which instantly drains all the hope Zhang Xiao had. She then starts searching for fire element items in her bag. Luckily, Xiao Lu hadn't paid attention to his earlier explanation and got things mixed up. Fire does nothing to water, but it works against gold. If she kept going with that wrong idea, it might actually work out. She then pulls a fire sword from her bag. He thanks her for her wrong choices. It couldn't have worked out better. That said, he separates a few more fire talismans to upgrade the attack. Meanwhile, inside the bracelets, the two deities argue about how dumb they were and how much more they'd have to put up with. Since everything had fallen into place, instead of waiting for Lang Yuning's group to show up, he would handle the monster first and then go rescue her. With his weapon ready, he asks the players to step aside. One of them tries to stop him, saying that using fire against earth would strengthen the monster instead of weakening it. He then drops the infamous line, falsely claiming that the worm was actually of the water element. As soon as the attack pierces the monster's armor, everyone is left speechless. Right after that, the worm finally emerges from the hole. Zhang Xiao faces it, and the demon prepares to attack him. The other group is panicking, but now that its head was exposed, more players would show up to try and attack. He had to finish it before that happened. Inside the bracelet, the black deity says that with his current level, he'd end up dying to the worm, and he was using that very situation to see what they would do, help him, or let him die. As expected, the white one says that if he died there, it wouldn't be good for them, so it was time to act. As soon as the worm attacks, a shield appears. His hands had moved on their own, and the yin-yang power had activated. The monster's HP dropped by 1% just from that defense. It was a stronger power than expected. Zhang Xiao then takes the opportunity and challenges the monster. The worm quickly begins to coil around him. Maybe that wasn't such a great idea after all. Xiao Luo sees what's happening from afar and gets worried. Now trapped, the bracelets start glowing again. The deities do everything they can to maintain the barrier. But suddenly, a sphere of energy appears between him and the monster, followed by several fireballs hitting the worm. After all, the monster's opponent wasn't just Zhang Xiao. Xiao Luo was also ready to fight. Meanwhile, he thinks about how to escape. Apparently, the deities had to keep him alive, but not help him get stronger. Meanwhile, the other spaced-out girl kept launching attacks around the worm. Soon, Lang Yuning's group arrives at the scene. She and Si Luo exchange glances. The group that had just arrived keeps attacking, but soon the monster loses patience and strikes back. The leader complains about the two girls, saying they were useless, and they reply that they'll help more. Everyone is shocked by how much HP the players lost from just one attack. Meanwhile, the monster's health bar was still nearly full, but they had to keep attacking. Whoever landed the final hit would be the winner. Only it wouldn't be that easy. It unleashes an area attack and several players are nearly wiped out. But while it moved to attack the players, Zhang Xiao ends up being freed from its grip. Suddenly, a fire attack hits him, taking a large chunk of his HP. It seemed a new group of players had arrived. The team, made up of one player from each element, had become the top 5 in player rankings. No one had known they were a group until now. The blonde girl with fire powers seemed to be the number 1, and her in-game nickname was I don't like eating spinach. She chants the spell and delivers another attack on the monster, but accidentally hits other players who were also on the worm. The people around start complaining, but compared to their power, the others were nothing. Anger consumes one of the players, but in the end, there was nothing he could do. Xiao Luo runs after her partner, and at the same moment, Lang Yuning also climbs onto the monster. The girl quickly turns to her team and asks for their help in saving her friend. But that was exactly the moment they had been waiting for, to stab her in the back and eliminate her from the game. She couldn't believe he had betrayed her, and right then, the system announces that her belongings now belong to him. Even though they wanted to mess around with her, given the situation, it was better to get straight to the point. They had to take advantage of the chaos to get Lang Yuning's belongings too. Meanwhile, the attacks continued, and Xiao Luo ended up getting hit. But just as she was about to fall, Zhang Xiao caught her. She asks how he managed to escape, and instead of getting out from above, he used the hole in the ground to escape the worm. Finally, the assassin had managed to reach them and asked what the two of them were doing there. But suddenly, 2 players attacked from behind. It seemed the foxes were finally showing their claws, but the swordsman wasn't going to let that slide and takes them both down. The other 3 left didn't understand why he was protecting the assassin. However, Zhang Xiao had already dealt with them before and wasn't going to let it go this time. When the men recognize who he really was, they all panic. No one expected a guy like that to reach level 17 so quickly. That way, he defeats the entire group and makes a point of taking all their belongings. Begging for their lives in the game, they asked to be spared. But Lang Yuning had other plans. After all, her friend Ansi had disappeared. They reveal they had forcefully removed her from the game and taken her items. Even though trash like that didn't deserve to escape so easily, leaving them broke was better than forcibly logging them out at that moment. But as everything comes back around, the worm ends up hitting them. They hadn't expected the game's top 5 to show up and defeat that monster. This way, they wouldn't be able to compete for the reward. But that wasn't necessarily true. That team worked very well together. While some attacked, others provided cover. And so they managed to keep consistent damage on the monster. Seeing the boss's HP bar drop, other players considered trying to steal the kill, but someone was already watching out for that. Even so, Xiao Luo and Lang Yuning get closer to it, and taking advantage of the distraction, Zhang Xiao slips past the brute, but the girls end up getting hit by his attack. Apai notices someone had slipped by, and gets ready to eliminate him, launching a flurry of arrows at Zhang Xiao. He manages to dodge some, but gets caught off guard by one of them, and his HP drops a bit. They're impressed to see his health reduced by 20% with just one hit. And from that distance, they couldn't help him either. Apai is a bit puzzled by having landed only one arrow, but before she can shoot more, she gets hit by small bullets near her feet. Manhua had just arrived and was ready for action. Zhang Xiao couldn't be happier with the timing. The blue-haired guy then orders the 2 girls to attack that kid instead of the monster, and just like that, everyone turns against the new enemy. He's hit by all their attacks, making Manhua worry. but before taking damage, he activated the power of his new armor and sword. No one expected him to have an invincibility mode. The player understands his goal and tries to stop him, throwing his sword toward the worm. But before it could hit the monster, Zhang Xiao activates extermination mode and strikes the worm. He had managed to steal the boss from the top 5. The players said in disbelief. He falls to the ground. It was close. He had almost failed to finish the beast. The system's congratulatory message appears. He had earned an amulet that increased allies' attack power, a sword that allowed you to paralyze an opponent for 15 seconds. And on top of that, he had gone from level 17 to 19. His partners also gained 3 levels, to the joy of all of them. But unlike the monsters, that other team hadn't disappeared yet. The brute starts walking toward them, but is quickly stopped by Spinach. Even if he tried something, he wouldn't be able to handle that opponent right now. Zhang Xiao tries to bargain, saying that although he didn't have much, he could give those 2 items to their team. But they reject the offer. There were only 2 days left until the monthly ranking was released, and they were sure their positions wouldn't change by then. That said, they leave, but for a second, Spinach looks back. Meanwhile, Zhang Xiao stores the new items in his arsenal, and Xiao Luo jumps on him out of happiness. That group was definitely going to farm so they could deal with the first level boss and move up. But they were going to do things differently. They would defeat the boss together. The last battle had shaken up the top 10 rankings, making players wonder what new strategies each team would use. But while the enemy team was endlessly farming, Zhang Xiao and his team were taking some time to relax. At least he was. Because of that, his partners were starting to doubt his strategy, but he clearly remained calm. At the moment, he was the only one in the top 5. Most likely the enemies would try to play dirty in the final battle. So he had to find a way to get the girls into the top 5 too. But if he used what he knew, he'd definitely draw the king's attention. When little Wang hears Zhang Xiao is having a spa day, he couldn't be more pissed. The brute was regretting not having bought winter clothes. That guy probably had a card up his sleeve, says Spinach. But little Wang was clearly upset by the possibility of losing his podium. There was no better place to farm than there, and he was going to keep trying. And everyone follows him, even if Spinach doesn't fully agree. Meanwhile, at the hotel, a little fox appeared walking in. Zhang Xiao stood up immediately. That was the fastest way for them to level up. The girls are a bit confused, but it seemed like the animal was some kind of quest NPC. Zhang Xiao then activates the Iron Trail quest, and as soon as he speaks those words, the little fox transforms and accepts the activation. Wellington says the players had to guess where the key was. If they guessed right, they leveled up. If wrong, they lost a level. It was a 50-50 shot, pretty risky at the moment. But even so, he decides to take the chance, and his team gets excited. And right after, he shows where the key was. The trick was that the fox had said to find where the key was, not which hand it was in. She congratulates him for the win and opens a portal to another dimension. In that place, weapons weren't welcome. They could only rely on each other. Because of that, their clothes also changed. Now they were facing agility challenges. They had to catch 30 fish before falling off the cliff. Xiao Luo then points to a side where several fish were jumping out of the water, and unexpectedly, they start smacking them. Zhang Xiao seemed to be holding it together, managing to grab the fish. But as soon as he sees the beauties soaking wet on the boat with him, he loses focus. Somehow, they manage to pass that first test, and the next mission is about to begin. The next challenge would be cooperation, and they are taken to an iron door. Without using items, they had to somehow squeeze the fish they were given. But the creature was slipperier than expected, and he could barely hold it. Xiao Luo thinks that since these are cooperation tests, more than one person probably needs to do it together. She then calls Meng Mu and asks her to hug the fish and crush it that way. This way, it wouldn't slip out. Her idea works incredibly well, and they complete the mission. The first of 100 fish had been popped. Now there were only 99 left. Zhang Xiao could only thank King Niama for inventing that game. It seemed they could pop the fish with any part of their body except their hand. Since 2 more were paired up, the assassin and the swordsman ended up together. But Xiao Luo was completely against that combination. Still waiting for a hug, when she opens her eyes, she finds herself facing an angry swordswoman, throwing several martial arts strikes at the fish, including one that flies straight into her face and bursts right after. Jealousy was capable of doing unimaginable things, so the teams are swapped, and now Lang Yuning and Mei Mu are together. Meanwhile, on the enemy team, the information that they had disappeared arrives, and in that moment of distraction, player number 1 ends up being taken down. Apai tells him to pay attention, and out of nowhere, Spinach's level goes up. Unexpectedly, the rankings change, and the one who surpasses Little Wang is Spinach, not Zhang Xiao. Suddenly, a live stream starts, talking about all these unexpected changes. Meanwhile, the swordsman's team manages to advance to the 3rd level of the mission. They enter a cave. Due to its high experience gain, it was definitely not going to be an easy mission. A bit farther back, Lang Yuning asks if Xiao Luo likes Zhang Xiao. They talk about how they would get the 2 of them together, when suddenly Meng Mu is pulled away. The 2 turn to look at the youngest and come face to face with a spider on her face. The 3 of them scream, drawing Zhang Xiao's attention. but as soon as he turns his back, the boss appears. He runs over to them and finds the three on the ground. As soon as they spot him, the spiders release the girls and go for him. He manages to grab two with his hands and smashes the third with them. Those things were so disgusting. Since the girls were unconscious, they had probably been poisoned. But before he finishes the thought, the mother spider appears, releasing her gas. It was a hallucinogenic gas, and little by little, he starts losing consciousness. Suddenly, he wakes up in a completely pink world and a hand reaches for him. A vision of Lang Yuning appears, calling him darling and asking to spend some time together. Like a good male protagonist, he agrees. In his ear, Mangmu's voice appears, asking if she could join too. It was time for them to have a little fun together. Happy to have both of them there, Zhang Xiao had forgotten there was a third. And Shou Luo shows up, wanting to play with him too. He replies saying there was a little bit of him for each of them, no need to fight. But then he realizes something is wrong. In the real world, the girl's energy was being drained, while the mother spider complained about only being able to use the gas and nothing more. But then she is caught off guard by a punch and falls to the ground dizzy. Luckily, he had managed to break free from the illusion and found the girls. With that, he was able to finish the mission and received a blessing chest from King Yama. The notes only mentioned he would gain experience. He wasn't expecting a reward chest as well. He then goes to wake the girls, and as soon as he does, he regrets it a bit. Shou Lu apologizes for hitting him, and Lang Yuning asks about the spider monster. He replies that he managed to defeat it, and now it was time for them to get their rewards. Back at the starter village, the live stream continued. Only 2 hours remained until the ranking closed, but an unexpected twist appears on the leaderboard. Zhang Xiao's entire team had leveled up, completely filling the top 5 spots. That turn of events was practically impossible, too historic. With such a huge point gap, the ones who would face the village boss to advance to the next level of hell would be Zhang Xiao's team. He takes out his anger on the nearby monsters. He couldn't believe what had happened. Being distracted, one tries to attack him from behind, but it's hit by a fireball. Little Wang turns to Spinach, irritated. Even if he tried something within the time they had, he wouldn't be able to surpass her score. The notification for the floor boss battle had appeared, and Spinach would soon be teleported. Little Wang was clearly hurt in his pride, so he asked Spinach not to let any of those 4 defeat the boss. But she didn't agree with acting that way. Even so, she says she would try just before being taken away. A lightning bolt strikes the sky, and the 5 arrive in the arena. That teleport was really fast, commenced Shou Luo. Then Spinach appears right when Zhang Xiao was talking about Little Wan. Even so, he tries to approach her. After all, she was the only mage on the team, and ends up a bit uneasy at the girl's reaction. Inside the bracelet, the deities discuss how strange it was that Zhang Xiao knew about that side quest. It was better for them to keep watching in order to gather more evidence than to act rashly. Meanwhile, he was also confused, trying to figure out what their next move would be, having already exposed himself more than he would have liked. The two then concluded that they would decide what to do after the final boss battle. While the monster enjoyed some music, a servant appeared to announce the arrival of the players. Apparently, he was a vain demon, as he wanted to look good for the occasion. But without realizing it, instead of his servant, the general appeared, completely startling the tower demon. Outside, they were confused upon hearing a sudden scream, but Spinach completely ignored it and began a brief explanation about the tower. There were 2 ways to advance to the next level: being among the top 5 in the ranking or climbing through each of the 9 levels of the tower until reaching the top. In the lower floors, the monsters were easier to defeat, but as they went up, the difficulty also increased. In the first weeks of the game, the difficulty was much lower, but as it gained popularity, the number of players who managed to get past this level dropped drastically, which meant fewer and fewer players were able to progress. Now they could understand why people so desperately aimed for the top 5 to deal with the boss directly. But in reality, that was the king's strategy to get people to play more and allow him to absorb more mana. Meanwhile, inside the tower, the Eastern General had appeared. He asked about the tower's situation, and the demon said everything was going according to plan. The tower's level had increased and the 5 monthly players had just arrived. Upon hearing that, the general gave an order. It was not to let any of them through. The idea was to eliminate the top 5 to destabilize the other players. Since King Yama wasn't willing to cooperate with him, he would show what he was capable of. The demon bowed to his emperor, and to cheer him up, he offered a buff that would help during the fight. Outside the tower, the players were already getting tired of waiting. But just as they were complaining, the demon appeared. The girls had expected a more handsome NPC and found him sloppy. Without a second thought, Meng Mu began attacking. When his HP didn't drop, the demon smugly commented that she was rude. She hadn't even started the fight properly. At that moment, she was stunned. It was supposed to be an easy boss to defeat. Spinach was also worried. According to the game, he should have lost HP from that basic attack. Something seemed to have changed. He blew a kiss and hit Meng Mu from afar. It seemed the boss had a long-range corrosive power. Zheng Xiao charged in. They needed to be careful with the demon's saliva. As he struck, the enemy dodged. Xiao Luo and Lang Yuning came right behind, but he also dodged all their attacks. The monster was clearly enjoying the buff he had received, and unexpectedly, they were losing a lot of HP in a short amount of time. He prepared to strike the two who were on the ground, but Zhang Xiao stopped him. If he wanted to finish them off, he'd have to go through him first. Spinach, for now, observed everything and noticed how different that player was from Little Wan. The demon got ready for another attack, but before he could strike, he was hit by a fireball. He was sent flying, and now Meng Mu had returned to the fight with a new weapon, one that had a 50% chance to land a critical hit. With that strike, they finally managed to reduce some of the enemy's HP. Taking advantage of the moment, she activated a continuous attack. Zhang Xiao praised his partner's great work. Spinach kept watching everything, learning about their fighting style. Luckily, Meng Mu had managed to corner the monster, so it was the perfect moment to strike. If Spinach didn't move soon, she wouldn't be able to finish off the monster and earn points for her team. In the middle of the attack, Zhang Xiao ended up falling, his foot now trapped by an ice crystal. He was all sad seeing that he was getting in the way instead of helping. Seeing that, the demon felt flattered, thinking he was the best. No one had ever helped him like that before. Spinach got ready, and Zhang Xiao asked Xiao Luo to keep an eye on her. Meng Mu couldn't be more stressed. They had just missed a great chance to finish off the boss. Besides that, she was spending a fortune on that weapon buff. Xiao Luo tries to start attacking Espinifer, but she always stayed out of her reach. Understanding what was going on in the player's mind, he tries to hit the enemy quickly to paralyze him, but his speed wasn't enough. However, from behind the demon, someone manages to land a blow. He's confused for a second. Lang Yuning had activated her stealth specialty. The monster panics and ends up being hit several times by her, just as expected from an assassin. Out of nowhere, Espinafer joins the game and hits the monster with a lightning strike, but it ends up hitting Lang Yuning too, who was close to him. Everyone got really irritated with her. If you're not going to help, at least don't get in the way. The assassin was okay, but unfortunately her power had been disabled. Because of that, the boss was able to catch his breath for a moment, which gave him enough time to activate another buff. He was very happy with that gift from the Emperor. His heart beat faster, and thanks to the candy the Emperor gave him, he leveled up 3 times. Zhang Xiao was completely shocked by it. He didn't know monsters could pull something like that. Now transformed, he goes after Lang Yuning, and when he attacks her, Zhang Xiao defends her and tries to activate the paralysis power of the sword. But it seems that wasn't enough. The level difference was too high now. The girls get worried about them. He grabs the assassin by the collar and throws her and Zhang Xiao toward the other two. Meng Nu and Xiao Luo catch them. The demon is pleased with his new power, and instead of eliminating them, he wanted to drain their energy right there. At that moment, Espinifer realizes that what he said wasn't normal for an NPC. Something was off. Distracted, she ends up caught by the demon's death grip and is pulled toward him. She closes her eyes, expecting the impact of the attack, but the demon is surprised. Instead of her, Zhang Xiao had stepped in front. The battle was quite fierce. Because of the upgrade, the monster's skin had been reinforced. They needed enchantments, but they couldn't count on Espinifer for that. So Xiao Luo thinks about buying whatever is needed, but they couldn't be irresponsible. If she left now, it would be a huge problem. The boss throws Zhang Xiao on top of Espinifer. At that same moment, Xiao Luo starts activating her skill. She had been protected by him many times and wanted to return the favor. Her power allowed her to generate clones with double attack power, but in exchange, the player would also take the damage inflicted on the clones. She was literally giving everything she had at that exact moment, because her power was a two-way street. As soon as all the clones are ready, she starts attacking. Several explosions burst around the demon, but with just one counterattack, he manages to destroy several of the clones, making Xiao Luo lose half of her HP. On the other side of the arena, Espinifer was finally helping the team, while Zhang Xiao was clearly worried. The boss thought all their attack attempts were pathetic. At this rate, he'd reach the real body in no time. Meng Mu was also struggling. She had spent all her money, so that was the last buffed attack from her weapon. But it seemed that method wouldn't work against him anymore, and he quickly reaches where Xiao Luo's real body was. She now had only 10% of her HP left. At the same time, Espinifer had finished enchanting the sword, and Zhang Xiao didn't waste another second. He activates his speed power and attacks the demon from behind. The monster strikes back, but he activates the golden armor just in time. It looked like the monster's life was now on a countdown. Finally, the protagonist's power was activated and the bloodlust armor had appeared. That was quite the combo. Even Espinifer had to admit he was a good strategist. His moment to solo the boss had begun, and in no time, he manages to completely defeat it. The monster fades out, saying it would hunt him down later. At last, they had managed to win the fight. Zhang Luo then collapses into a seated position as the adrenaline fades. A demon messenger arrives and announces the rise of the top 5 to the next level. Upon hearing the news, the Emperor was furious. It was time to use his final trump card. As soon as the battle ended, they were teleported to the starting area of the second level of that world. It looked a lot like the village from the previous level, but unlike it, there wasn't a single living soul nearby. Not having players was one thing, but not even NPCs was something new. Besides, the gate to the main city was closed, which was strange. Maybe they had to complete a quest first. But Zhang Xiao's thoughts were interrupted by an unexpected pain. Spinach looked worried for a second, but everything seemed fine. Suddenly, they heard loud laughter. Inside a bar, the local demons were celebrating, since after the difficulty increased, their jobs had been pretty easy. But suddenly, they were interrupted by a player opening the bar window, asking for information on how to leave that place. The demon couldn't believe someone had actually managed to ascend to the second level. But soon his surprise faded, and he began to explain the second floor. After all, he was the guide there. His name was Knows-It-All. Surrounded by demons, Zhang Xiao asked if Knows-It-All had any idea how to open the gate. And in fact, it was quite simple. The gate would open in exchange for treasure. Zhang Xiao then opened his arsenal to take a look. There was something he didn't know what to do with. The purple pearl suddenly transformed into the mother spider from the previous floor, and even he wasn't expecting that. Xiao Luo pulled his ear, since when was he imprisoning demons like that? Knows-It-All quickly praised him. He really knew how to play. Acquiring a pet like that wasn't easy. He'd open the gate in exchange for that beauty without any problem. But now it was Zhang Xiao who didn't want to give up the girl. Knows-It-All became furious. No one had ever said no to him before. If the kid didn't want to hand her over, he'd take her by force then. A few minutes passed and the gates opened. Zhang Xiao had beaten up Knows-It-All. If he really was a guide, he had to do his job properly and not rob the players. The five then entered the gates of the new prison, but something was missing. For them to keep playing, they needed a quest, and Knows-It-All said he had the perfect one for them. But first, they'd have to properly train the new pet, because they were going to need her. Zhang Xiao quickly got carried away by impure thoughts. An option panel appeared in front of him, and the most reasonable one was a pat on the butt. So he did exactly that. He didn't expect something as simple as a pat would be enough to make the demon girl change personalities. It seemed that underworld pets had specific spots on their bodies that activated their submissive mode, and luckily he had hit the spiders. Xiao Lu was furious. She swore she'd offer that pet to the heavens as a sacrifice. Everyone tried to calm her down, and Knows-It-All ended up letting a piece of information slip. On that new level, there was a particular treasure that only spider pets could easily reach. That fire pearl wasn't just used to upgrade equipment. If they gathered 30 of them, they could buy the Red Bird's cloak. Since they already had the crown, if they managed to get the cloak, the team's combat power would increase beyond expectations. Zhang Xiao asked how he knew she had the crown, as he hadn't mentioned anything about it. Knows-It-All said he didn't have that name for nothing. Everything related to the kingdom or the game, he would know. They then said goodbye to the monster, but as Zhang Xiao walked away, he said he could see an aura around the boy. His life was hanging by a thread. As they walked, Spinach asked what the boss they had defeated meant with his last words. What were the secrets of that game after all? Well, Zhang Xiao couldn't hide it anymore. He had to tell the truth. But just as he started speaking, the bracelets activated and threw him into another part of the forest. They had already gathered enough evidence. They couldn't let him tell the truth to others. While interrogating him, they asked how he knew about those secrets, but he answered with another question, asking if King Yama had sent them. Seeing her sister was about to lose her temper, the one in white held her back. Zhang Xiao was feeling weaker and weaker ever since he entered that second world. They hadn't done anything to him, so it could only be Yaksha. He must have cursed him before dying. They had to act fast, or they were going to lose him. It seemed the curse had even hidden his real health bar. Little by little, he began to lose consciousness. A purple crystal appeared in front of him, and two new characters emerged, one of ice and one of lilac fire. A third one of lightning also appeared, and unexpectedly, King Yama was being restrained by all three. Zhang Xiao had no idea what was going on. It seemed like the four emperors had turned against him and were trying to suppress him. A suppression spell had been activated, preventing the king from using his power. Zhang Xiao hadn't expected a rebellion like that to happen. Feng Yang tries to do something. She couldn't watch her king being imprisoned like that. But the Eastern Emperor not only defends himself but strikes back at her. She still wasn't a match for their powers. However, that attack created the perfect opportunity for Yama to attempt an escape. Even with the formation fully in place, he was still the king. Just that wouldn't be enough to stop him. Seeing the cracks forming, the Eastern Emperor calls for reinforcements from the others. At once, they begin using their own blood to strengthen the formation. They desperately needed to seal the king somehow. Otherwise, all four of them would end up dying at his hands. Zhang Xiao starts screaming in pain, but a voice echoes in his mind, happy that they were finally meeting. For the first time, Zhang Xiao and King Yama stood face to face. At first, the human is confused. It was strange for both souls to be seeing each other. Yama then explains that they were in the Sea of Souls and that if the human hadn't shown up recently, he would likely already be sealed by now. The player couldn't believe it. It made no sense for the emperors to rebel. They were supposed to obey the king. Yama takes a deep breath and begins to tell the story behind the game. It turns out that some time ago, the underworld began to fall apart due to a lack of energy. So the Emperor Fengdu, the previous ruler of the underworld, entrusted him with managing the game and harvesting souls. But as soon as Fengdu died, the four emperors showed their true colors, wanting to absorb more and more energy. However, if they went through with their plans, the balance between the two worlds would collapse, resulting in the destruction of both. It was interesting to learn all of that, but Zhang Xiao still didn't understand why he was able to enter the king's body every time he died. According to the king's theory, during the beta phase of the game, he had created himself as player 0, and in a 1 in a million chance, his character ended up with the same attributes as Zhang Xiao's, and once Yama realized that possibility, he assigned the empresses to watch over him, and also provided him with equipment, specifically for that moment, so everything had happened to him exactly so he could defeat the emperors alongside the king. Time was running out. The king would soon be sealed by Fengdu's power, so now it was all up to Zhang Xiao. Since they shared the same attributes, Yama would try to transfer his powers to him. It was now his mission to maintain the energy balance between the two worlds. With that said, he also transfers his memories to Zhang Xiao. Once he returned to his body, he needed to find Feng Ying, as she held a very important key. He had to finish the game as quickly as possible. Inside the circle, the manifestation of the god of the underworld was activated. It seemed like Yama, in his final moments, was trying to drag the four emperors down with him. But his plan was actually different. Rather than protect himself, he made it a point to protect his servant. At that moment, the emperors realized she might be holding something important, so they did everything they could to stop him from escaping. Even so, she's teleported right before their eyes. That had literally been the king's final breath. He was now completely sealed by the emperors. Still, something about it seemed odd. Why would he use that manifestation on his servant instead of himself? However, that didn't matter right now. With the king sealed, they could finally block the players and trap them inside the game. There was just one problem. The king's library was on fire, and they couldn't find the master key to the game no matter what they tried. The king had been smart enough not to let them take control. Only the other servants still tried to stop the emperor, but they weren't strong enough to face him. The four emperors then began asking where that damned fox had gone. But not only would the servants refuse to speak, they also genuinely didn't know where she had gone. The emperor, on the other hand, had other plans. After all, as long as they stayed in the castle, that fox would surely come crawling back. Zhang Xiao was sent back to his body, and didn't even have time to process all that information. Feng Ying was somewhere on the map, and he needed to find her before the emperors did. He had to find his team quickly, but the moment he crossed the gate, the two deities appeared. They didn't know what had happened, so they tried to restrain him to take him to the king. As soon as Zhang Xiao asked to be released, a wave of power burst from his body, hitting both of them. The god of the underworld had appeared, and they couldn't understand why he was inside that player's body. Zhang Xiao briefly told the two of them what had happened with the king, and they couldn't forgive what the emperors had done to him. That said, he needed their help to find Feng Ying and stop them. Without hesitation, they agreed to stand by his side and help him with that mission. But to avoid raising suspicions, they needed to remain in secret, so it was better for them to turn back into bracelets. For their transformations to happen, their clothes fell to the floor. He couldn't understand why that was necessary, but gladly accepted it. Near the fire abyss, the girls observed the situation and tried to figure out how deep that crater was. The place was so hot that even if they tried to fly over it, they'd probably have lost 100% of their HP before making it back. Well, there wasn't much else they could do except wait for him to return. Almost as if summoned, Zhang Xiao arrived at the spot where they were, and the girls were overjoyed to see him again. Spinach asked why he had suddenly gone flying earlier. He then said that something unbelievable had happened while he was away, and though he knew it would be hard to understand, he needed them to stay calm and pay attention. So he began telling the story of everything that had happened. As expected, no one was ready for such a twist, but they weren't in a regular game anymore, and any slip-up could truly lead to his death. He still had hope they'd be able to log out of the game and save themselves. But if they left, what would happen to him, they asked. Zhang Xiao then replied that the king had placed all his hopes on him. There was no way he could leave now. Xiao Lu stepped forward and told him she refused to leave. She'd been deceived by that game and wanted justice. The emperors wanted to destroy both worlds, so even if they left now, it wouldn't help at all. Meng Mu added, and Lang Yuning agreed. For them, the game was getting more interesting, and they didn't want to leave all the fun to him. They were already his partners and weren't giving up those roles now. There were only 4 enemies left, and besides, he now had the king's memories. They could definitely win. Zhang Xiao was instantly moved. Watching from afar, Spinach could only think about how crazy they were. Without a mage's support, they wouldn't be able to do anything, so she had only one option. She didn't want them to die, and they had come that far together. That said, the team was now truly complete, and the 5 of them joined hands and prepared for what was coming. They had barely finished celebrating when a roar echoed. It seemed to come from inside the lava fissure, but something was off. According to the king's memories, there weren't supposed to be any monsters in the abyss. As the only one who could withstand the intense heat, the spider began descending slowly. Lang Yuning was worried about her, but since Knows-It-All had said she was the only one capable, they had to try. From afar, Zhang Xiao shouted to her that if she couldn't take it, she could come back, but that made the pet happy and even more motivated to succeed, which somehow was part of his plan. She finally reached the bottom. The pearl had to be nearby. After looking around a bit, she spotted it stuck to a wall. Using her saliva, she managed to grab the pearl. How? Don't ask me. She gathered a few, but most of the holes were empty. Unfortunately, there weren't 30 of them down there. Someone had probably gotten there before them, or maybe the pearls had fallen into the lava. She said she'd take another look around, but suddenly, 2 eyes formed. At that very moment, Zhang Xiao pulled her back, and a creature emerged from the fire, trying to bite her. They kept pulling until they got her out. But to everyone's misfortune, the dragon came too. Someone had definitely tampered with the game settings. There wasn't supposed to be a monster like that there. It was clearly after the pearls the spider had collected. Zhang Xiao jumped in between them and activated the bracelet shield. That monster was incredibly strong. They needed water attribute weapons fast. The monster got ready for its first real attack, and several fireballs began to fly. At the last moment, Espineffer manages to summon a water shield, protecting everyone. Meanwhile, Zhang Xiao heads toward the dragon and strikes it with his sword. This wasn't a place for the monster to be playing around. Inside the shield, the girls begin to celebrate. It seemed that now Espineffer could also enchant weapons without attributes. Little by little, the dragon starts to dissolve and pearls begin to emerge. For some reason, the pearls were in its stomach, which is probably why it had been following them. But then Zhang Xiao starts to suspect that from the beginning, it had actually been a trap set by Know-It-All. Inside his office, Know-It-All was furious. The 4 emperors had been able to seal the king, but not the game, and now they wanted to lower the difficulty. That was a huge problem. The amount of work was going to increase again. On top of that, the lava dragon had been defeated, and those 5 players were coming after him, his servant said. At that moment, Know-It-All freezes in place. Back in the village, they were still fighting continuously in the forest. When they passed through before, there hadn't been that many ghosts, but now it was packed. It seemed Zhang Xiao had been right. Know-It-All could change some things at that level, and had probably sent the ghosts to block their path. Would it be dangerous to go back? Espineffer asks. But having someone who knew that prison inside and out was exactly what they needed to find Feng Ying. They couldn't let Know-It-All escape like that. Meanwhile, in the rock forest, the little fox was crawling along the walls, injured. She needed to protect the king's treasure no matter what. But could there be rare monsters nearby? She couldn't help but worry. Suddenly, she hears the voices of 2 players nearby. There was no way she could defeat them at the moment. If she failed and the news spread, she'd be screwed. She had to find a way to keep hiding. Out of nowhere, a mission screen appears. The 4 emperors had placed a bounty on Zhang Xiao's group, and they didn't need to be captured, just eliminated. A player hunting mission was something new. Things were getting interesting. The players get excited and decide to return to the starting village. Feng Ying had been saved by the bell. At least now she would have a chance to recover. Meanwhile, in the starting village, several players were gathering. Know-It-All was confident that his strategy would work, but it seemed that somehow his spies had lost track of Zhang Xiao's group. He quickly starts bragging, thinking the group had run away with their tails between their legs. But unexpectedly, something begins to shine in the sky. Their group hadn't vanished. They had simply tried a different entrance. The rain of bullets begins, and Know-It-All starts to panic. But before the group can land, he opens a secret passage to the underground. However, even with that attempt, he wouldn't be able to escape.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.